Hey YouTube, what is up, and welcome back to another video in the series where I'm trying to start my own tech company. If you haven't been following along in my other videos, I'm building a Pomodoro application to help keep track of my time a little bit better. And that app has a problem, a major problem, and that's that for some percentage of users, some of the time, when the app finishes a timer, it does not increment the experience or user level for that user. If you haven't been following along, that sounds kind of complicated, so maybe let's just take a look at it. So this is the app that I've actually built. This is the development version, not the production version. So it looks a little bit different in production, and also the styling hasn't been done at all. So what you're seeing is just a very rough draft for the sake of functionality. That being said, I believe that I've replicated the issue in development here to be a one-to-one issue of what happens in production. So if I press start and we wait 5 seconds for the timer to run down, look at my little animation. I worked on that in a previous video. This is exactly what happens in production. So basically, when your timer finishes, what's supposed to happen is that your character should gain 1 XP. And instead, what happens is that the level is 0 and the XP is 0. And this also, I believe, blocks you from starting another timer because we need to take the level and XP as a reference when we start the next timer, so we know what the user is incrementing. So this is possibly like a totally breaking bug for my application. And even if it's not a totally breaking bug, and let's say the level and experience are still incrementing in the background, this is a pretty poor user experience. And I think it's important to note that this is primarily a user experience issue. So now that I've explained the issue, what are the causes? I think this is due to one of two main things. One, it could be that for those users, they are doing multiple things while they're running this timer. And if you don't have My App as the active tab in Google Chrome or Firefox, whatever browser you're using, Chrome, specifically at least, because that's what I know best, Chrome, might be throttling CPU resources to this tab. And if that happens, the timer might pause itself entirely because it doesn't have any resources to be able to increment the timer every second. The second possible problem is that JavaScript is a single-threaded language. So if you're actively doing other stuff, even if Chrome isn't throttling CPU resources to this tab, the script, the programming to increment the timer might get stuck behind other code that has to run for other stuff that you're doing. This is a smaller issue than Chrome throttling all CPU resources to this tab and causing the timer to pause itself entirely. Instead, the second part of the problem will cause an incremental drift over a longer period of time. In development mode, the timer is 5 seconds, and that's so that I can test this multiple times. But in production mode, the timer is 25 minutes. So if there's a possible interference every second that the timer is incrementing, over the course of 25 minutes, the drift that we might see, while it is only milliseconds every second, over the course of 25 minutes, it might end up being 2 to 3 minutes. And most of the time, from what I've observed of this bug in production, that's what's happening. Usually, when the user completes the timer, the actual time remaining on the sprint is, or the time completed in the work sprint is 27, 28 and a half minutes. Occasionally, it's 30 minutes. So now that we have a better understanding of what could be causing the problem, it's important to look at the potential solutions. And the way that I see it, there are 4 potential solutions here. One, in order to get the JavaScript off of the main thread, we could create a web worker and try to run the timer in the web worker. 2, we could, instead of running the logic for the timer on the client, we could try running that script on the server and then use a, what is it called? We could use a WebSocket to update the UI on the front end. The third option is to refactor the code entirely to use the performance object in JavaScript, which is supposedly a much more efficient way of running something like a timer, and it is often used to benchmark performance standards for websites in Chrome. And the fourth option is to just ignore the problem. We can fix it in a minor way, but maybe trying to go all out on a technical implementation doesn't make a lot of sense. So now that we have four options, I think it's important, when you're trying to run a startup, a business, especially as a solo founder, compared to just being a developer, it's important to look at your problems through the lens of a CEO instead of through the lens of a developer. And I think the solutions that you should take to solve problems change depending on which lens through which you look at the problem. So if you look at it as a CEO instead of a developer, I think option 4 makes a lot of sense. But if you're purely a developer working on this application, usually you want to go with the most technically sound solution to the problem. And in this case, that's probably solution number 2. I know that solution number 2 is work that we want to do eventually, because in my mind, when you weigh all the pros and cons, option number 1, for example, might get JavaScript off the main thread. Option number 3 might get JavaScript off the main thread or might improve the performance, but we're still going to have this issue on mobile, maybe. And we also have the issue of syncing timers cross devices. And the only way that I can see to solve that problem is solution 2, which is moving the code to run the timers onto the server. And then that way, it doesn't matter whether you're accessing via a phone or accessing via a computer, the logic is handled on the server and the UI is only updated to track that timer. So with option 4, which is maybe the most straightforward solution, to just ignore it, I don't think we can totally ignore the user experience, but we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, what's the real problem here? Like I mentioned earlier in the video, sometimes the timers take around 28 to 30 minutes. This is the upper range. Most of the time, they finish at 25 minutes like they're supposed to. But sometimes, depending on what work you're doing on the computer and how your computer distributes your CPU resources, it takes longer. And if this was a problem that affected all of my users all of the time, I think my solution here would be different. But instead, it's a solution that affects some of my users some of the time. So if I only look at this as a user experience problem, I'm okay with sometimes having the timer go for 28 minutes. I think that that's not ideal, but it's an acceptable rough draft. And we can fix that later when there are less important things to fix. But like I said in the beginning of the video, this is just a rough draft of the UI. The application won't even look like this when we're done. And in order to get started, you have to have a working version that you can just test, or at least a mostly working version. So option 4, or solution 4, I should say, gets us to a mostly working solution faster. Hopefully that makes sense. I could maybe in another video explain exactly how I'm going to fix this. Actually, I could just do that real fast. Basically, after 25 minutes, I'm running some calculation to make sure that the completed time when the sprint finishes matches up with the expected completed time from a timestamp from when you started the timer. I'm usually making sure that it's exactly within that 25-minute mark. So I'm just removing that upper bound, and whether it takes 25 minutes or 30 minutes, I'm still going to credit the user with completing the work sprint, and the experience and level should update properly. So that's all I have to share. I have been super busy this week, but this is one particularly annoying problem that I ran into, and it took a lot of my time to just investigate and really pin down what the issue was. And then when I was sort of writing my notes and how I was going to solve it, I thought that it might make a decent video for other people that are maybe engineers and trying to get a better product sense, or they're engineers, solo founders, and they are also on their own journey to try to start their own side project. And sometimes looking at the problem in a different lens really helps. And until you're shipping a product to users, I think the most important thing you need to do is just ship the product and not get too bogged down in overly technical solutions to problems that might have a shortcut hiding in plain sight. So I just wanted to share my reasoning as I made that decision, and hopefully it was informative to other people going through the same thing. As always, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. I'll see you around, and thanks for following. Bye.